Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our monthly free webinar, How the Gender Wage Gap Impacts Women, Men, Children, and Families. We've been so fortunate through the years to be able to share really wonderful presenters and topics to you, but I am especially excited with today's webinar. Today we have two very special women speaking to us from the Institute for Women's Policy Research in Washington, D.C. Ariane Hegewisch and Julie Anderson will be doing the presentation. I will start out with some information on financial social work because we always have new people joining us on these webinars, and we like you to know why we sponsor them and what our work at the Center for Financial Social Work is all about. I am Rita Wolfson, and I am the founder of the Financial Social Work Discipline and the Financial Therapy Network. So I will get started by talking about one of my very favorite subjects. That would be financial social work and money. And after over 18 years of working to create all of this body of work, this certification in financial social work, we of us here at the center know that financial problems are about much more than money. That actually ties in with the presentation we're going to have today. So, financial problems represent a client's relationship with money and with him or herself, and our client's financial behavior. And those two components added together, financial behavior being or meaning how we earn, spend, save, and share. Those two pieces equal our financial circumstances, whether it's our own or our clients. And right there between financial behavior and financial circumstances, that's where the magic happens. That's where we need to see sustainable long-term financial behavioral change happen. So dollars and cents don't make financial choices. We'd sometimes like them to. It would be easier if we could just help people understand the basics of money. But since dollars and cents aren't in charge of our financial choices, that's not going to happen. We need more. We need to understand that each of us has an inner money self. Think about it. Think about your inner money self and your relationship with your inner money self. Financial circumstances originate from within the money self. Your money self includes your thoughts, feelings, and actions with your money and with yourself. And so this quote is perfect. Money is not the problem. It's our relationship with it that is. So financial behavioral change. It requires a healthier money self because someone with a healthy money self engages more readily, always a problem engaging clients to talk about money. Someone with a healthier money self is more hopeful, more eager to change, and more prepared to succeed. So financial well-being requires this healthier money self, and that's where financial social work fits in. We don't just teach the basics of money, the dollars and cents. We address forgiveness and boundaries and confidence, behavioral change, self-acceptance, help. There's a strong component of hope and positivity. We want to help clients create a different, healthier mindset, be more self-accepting, to be at peace with their money. That is a favorite slide, which you might be familiar with. So now, as we're about to hand this over, I will just give you an overview of the financial social work model. It looks like this. It is about ongoing education, motivation, validation, and support. And that's because we know those are the components that help people take control of their money and gain control of their lives. They are the pieces that help us to help our clients to improve their financial well-being. The model is interactive, introspective, and strengths-based. It works individually and with groups, and many financial therapists use it also. So I will be advancing the slides today. So I need to go ahead and welcome. Okay, an interesting point as you listen to this wonderful presentation and watch it, because their slides are just gorgeous. You can see here that Ariane and Cynthia were to do the presentation. But like so many working moms know, Cynthia's children both became ill today, so she's not with us. And fortunately, she's in a position to stay home with her children. And so we have a different speaker who will be introducing herself in a little bit. So Ariane, are you ready?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you so much, Rita, for this wonderful introduction and for giving us the opportunity to talk about one of our favorite topics, which is the gender wage gap. And you can see I've cut the title of how the gender wage gap impacts women, men, children, and families to what we are focused on is and public policy. And I'm Ariane Hegewisch, and I'm a program director here at the Institute for Women's Policy Research, responsible for issues around employment and earnings. And so just that you've heard our voice already, here is...
Hello, Julie Anderson. I'm a research associate here at IWPR, and I'll tell you a little more about myself when it's my turn.
Great, thanks.
Great.
Next slide, please.
Okay, here we go.
Great. So just 1 minute on our institute. The Institute for Women's Policy Research has been around now for almost 30 years, and we're probably the main think tank in the US which is solely focused on women's economic security issues. There you can see here some of our publications and our key policy areas. And as I said, today we're going to talk about equal pay, which is essential to what we're doing, and women's education and training, which is another important stepping stone to helping women get economic security. Really, our goal is to do research and pull out the fact and figures to put them at the fingertips of policymakers and women and men working for women's economic security in the US and in each state. So our goal really is to generate, but also to communicate the kind of facts and the research behind the policies that we need to ensure that there is greater equality. Next slide, please. So just quickly, what we would like to do today is we've split the presentation into two. I'm going to start to talk about equal pay and the wage gap, to go into the basic explanations of how big the wage gap is and how big it is for what parts of the population, and then to look at why it's there, why it is so persistent, and to start turning to what to do about it by looking at work and family issues. And then I'll hand over to Julie, who is going to look specifically at training and education programs and the type of initiatives that help women to get through them and to success. succeed. And there will be opportunities for question and discussion at the end, if Julie hits me on the head and gets me to speed up. Now, to jump right in, here you see a line, which is a timeline, starting in 1960 and ending in 2058. Probably not, who knows, unlikely that I will see that time. And what it shows is a projection of the rate of progress from 1960 to now in closing the gender wage gap. If progress continued at the same rate, when will we get to equal? 2058. This is assuming the same rate of progress since 1960. However, if we took the same rate of progress since 2000, and you can see from 2000 to now, really the line is pretty flat, then, you know, we might never get there. So we're truly stuck with the wage gap. You're probably wondering why we have Jon Stewart up there. Partly because we're incredibly proud that we got this message that we really, that the wage gap is persistent and won't go away by itself, certainly, onto Jon Stewart, but also because it's a sign of optimism. This is an issue that even Jon Stewart and the Wall Street Journal have picked up, so maybe now is the time to really focus on what can make it at least reduce, if not go away, or speed up the progress. Next slide, please. Okay, I said since 1960 we've looked at progress, which is basically when the good data starts. And what you see here is three lines. The red one in the middle is the gender earnings ratio, a comparison of female and male earnings for full-time year-round work. So that's the opposite of this is the wage gap. And you can see that it kind of moved upwards pretty well and from about 1980 to about 2000, and since then it's much flatter. But what we're also showing here is one factor behind this. The top gray line is men's earnings in real dollars, inflation adjusted, and the bottom line is women's earnings. And you can see when men's earnings go up very rapidly until the mid-70s with the first big recessions, nothing happens on the wage gap. But then basically men's earnings stall. There is no further increase across all men of real earnings. And that was one of the factors also, which really means that women need to contribute to families. So it's women's potential to do this, but also the necessity, because one family with one earner just is no longer enough. And you can see here, half of all mothers either are the sole breadwinner in their family or the co-breadwinner, which means that they at least contribute 40% of all earnings. So women's earnings are incredibly important. Women's earnings have kept going up. They're also stagnating now. But really, the wage gap costs not only women, it also costs their families. Next slide, please. Now, I've focused so far on median annual earnings, and the median is basically the midpoint at which 50% of people earn more and 50% earn less. So the median yearly earnings for full-time workers, that's the FT, which is the headline figure we use because it includes almost the largest share of the workforce. You can see here, though, whichever way we measure the wage gaps and earnings, there is a wage gap. It's narrowest for hourly workers, which are workers typically who are lower paid, and the wage gap tends to be lower for the lowest paid because everybody tends to not have very good earnings, but that also covers only slightly more than half of the workforce. The wage gap is biggest if you don't take a year or a point in time, but take it over the lifetime, and then it gets really bad because women still do the majority of care work and are more likely than men to disrupt their employment because they do care work. And depends on the study, but now and what age group you look at, but it's between 38 and 55% of earnings, so a huge gap. The second issue to mention is, we take a average figure with the yearly annual earnings or the yearly the weekly earnings, but the wage gap for women of color is even bigger compared to white men, who are the majority still in the labor market. It's only 67% for black women and only 61.5% for Hispanic women. Next slide, please. Now, before we start to look at what causes the wage gap, I just want to mention one issue that doesn't cause it. It's education. Women are as, if not more, educated than men in the labor market at all levels. But what you can see here in this slide is that women, once you control for education, earn less than men at each level of education. And importantly, you see the red line here. This is the near poverty or 200% of poverty threshold for an adult with 3 kids. And as you can see here, men can lift themselves above the poverty line, the median earnings, just if they have a high school degree. They may have some more training, but just with the high school degree, if you are a typical man, you can earn enough to lift your family out of near poverty. For women, it takes a bachelor's degree. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Right, so now, what causes the wage gap? What do we know about it, and why the lack of progress? Really, there are the three major factors, or the 3 major factors that we can pin down are occupational segregation, the fact that women tend to work in different occupations from men, and the occupations women work in pay less. Say, take a librarian compared to a computer support specialist. Big difference in earnings, even though librarians, or big difference in education needed to get to lower earnings. That accounts for about slightly under a third of the gap. Then the same sector segregation or industry segregation, women tend to work more in retail or services. Men are more likely to work in manufacturing, transportation, and the same jobs in both sectors pay less in services and retail, where women typically work. So together, working in different sectors and occupations accounts for over half of what we can pin down of the gap. And then the third known big factor is women spend less time in paid work because they do more family care work, unpaid work. Now, this only accounts for 14% of the gap and has really shrunk. The gap in experience is only 1.4 years between men and women, but it still costs them dearly. And then there is the final big bucket, which in a way influences everything, is discrimination in pay, recruitment, and promotions. It's basically everything that's left once you account for all the demographic factors and work factors and hours of work that you can control for. And it's our best estimate for discrimination. In here would also go something like different negotiating behaviors. We hear a lot about this, that women are less likely than men to negotiate. And it seems to explain about 5 or 6% of earnings differences. But I think the issue here is that we also know that when women do negotiate, they kind of get seen as less positive than men. It's kind of like, what's she up to? Why is she negotiating? That's not a very feminine behavior. And also, I feel there are 2 solutions to that, and one seems to be help women negotiate more and become more like men. My other one is help men negotiate less, because I think transparency and, kind of more open structures with more clear and rational criteria is better than everybody using their elbows, and those who shout loudest get most. But that might just be me. Anyway, next slide, please. Okay, so now to look at the biggest part, occupational segregation, women doing different work, jobs from men. We are at the moment doing a project specifically on middle skill jobs that are those that need a bit more than high school, but not a full 4-year university degree. And you can see women are the majority of workers in those jobs, but they're overrepresented among the low-paid workers in middle skill jobs. And they're underrepresented among the high-paid workers in those jobs. And, you know, you look at some of the occupations that are having at the moment quite a lot of growth, and employers say they have skill shortages and can't fill jobs. And, of course, demographic changes mean that in future we will, in the next few years, coming very near future, people hopefully will be able to retire, and we need to replenish those skills. You can see only 3% of workers in construction jobs that pay at least $35,000 a year are women. Only 7% of workers in manufacturing occupations, and only 9% in transportation-related occupations. And I think that's, in a way, that's really shocking. Even in IT, with you know, almost 3 in 10 women workers being women, it's still a very low proportion. Next slide, please. And the reason, you know, as I said, it feeds into the wage gap, and this just shows the difference in middle skill jobs between occupations that are mainly done by women, those that are reasonably mixed, and occupations that are mainly done by men. And the difference in earnings between the mainly female and the mainly male ones is 66 cents in the dollar, or workers in the female-dominated occupations make 34 cents a dollar, 34 cents a dollar less than the workers working in the male occupations. And on top of that, you know, these are all workers in those occupations. On top of that, you also have a wage gap within the occupation. Next slide, please. Okay. So this shows why I am going on about this so much, because there's a clear relationship between progress in closing the gender wage gap and progress in integrating occupations. You know, when occupations became rapidly integrated, the wage gap closed, and now the integration of occupation has stalled and the wage gap isn't closing anymore. Next slide, please. And now we're coming to a polling question, a little breather.
Okay, let me go ahead and open this poll. Okay, so we have 2 poll questions today, and we are going to launch the first poll. Okay. You can pick one choice.
And let me tell you, there isn't a right answer to this. It's really, we're scratching our head and saying, why is this going on? So, you know, this is a genuine question, actually.
Oh, so we're guinea pigs, huh? Okay. I could share with everyone the trouble I had fitting the question and the answers into the allotted space. So hopefully it seems like everybody has a sense of what we're looking for. Okay, 68% of you have voted. I'll go ahead and count it down. So if you want to vote, go ahead and do it, and then we'll all look at the answers you shared. Very interesting. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We got over 77% voting. I'm closing it now. 79% just as I closed it. And let me share those results with you. Ariane, do you want to discuss them?
This is really interesting. I think we're going to take forward that the lack of supports issue will come up more at the end and in a minute.
I know.
And so it's interesting. We probably here are fairly much focused on information. So the top one, unaware of earnings and job opportunities in male-dominated jobs, partly because some research we did a couple of years ago suggests that, showing women looking for training at job centers, options of higher paying male-dominated jobs, and a large proportion said, oh, I didn't know, I kind of would have picked that. So part of our work is to focus that on information at all levels. But certainly the discrimination part, I think, is really big. And I think I would have ticked the no idea, I wish I knew, which is I know about discrimination, but partly I think this is so stuck. There's something I've been working on for since the 80s, and so you kind of think, okay, it could have moved a little bit. It doesn't explain why only 2% of car mechanics women. It doesn't make any sense to me. So thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, onwards ever. Let me go back to the.
I think it's very complicated. I think we could have had the final choice be all of the above.
Yes.
But that's why I'm so thrilled that you're speaking to everyone today and that you're doing the work you're doing. So here we go.
Right. So this is just to highlight the need to address equal pay for equal work. What this shows is if women received the same hourly pay as men of the same age, same level of education, and same residential status, poverty rates would be halved. And that holds for single mothers, for single women without kids or without dependent kids, and for married women. And I think it almost holds in all states. Additionally, it would add a huge amount of money to how women's pockets, and we know that women spend this more, and so it would have a big impact on the GDP. So one of our reasons why we really need to address that. Okay, next slide, please. I'm going to rush through this. This is the first policy side, is care work. Just to stress, we know women are working, but care work is still there, and this is childcare work, but also looking after who have a disability and elder workers our elders, parents, and whoever needs support. And this need is growing, particularly on retirement issues. Next slide, please. But we have very few supports in the workforce which acknowledge that now there are no more kind of wives at home being able to do the kind of work that is needed to make sure that the other people in the household can be ready to work each morning. So even the very basic things such as paid family and medical leave, including maternity leave. The US is one of only 3 countries in the world without paid maternity leave, and 40% of workers are not even covered by the Family and Medical Leave Act. That means they haven't even the right to unpaid leave. And from whatever we know, this is not something employers are jumping to fill. the gap. It's expensive to provide this, and basically a lot of people have to do a hodgepodge or interrupt their work. We don't even have a right to paid sick days in the US. Again, that's very different from what's customary in the rest of the world. And as you can see, half of all Hispanic women are without paid sick leave, 40% of all women, which means for yourself, but also if your child is sick. And we know, particularly for lower wage women or in kind of poor quality jobs, that often means you lose your job and you have to start again, and it interrupts your income and your seniority. Childcare is incredibly expensive. Infant care is more expensive than college in a large number of states. Even school hours, although they're not as bad as where I come from in Germany, where school finished before lunch. But, it doesn't cover the work days here in the US, and vacations aren't covered, and predictable hours, which we really need to be able to plan childcare and caregiving responsibilities, are not something people, particularly in low-wage jobs, can rely on. Next slide, please. So really, how does this link to the wage gap? If we don't have flexibility and leave, and with the high cost of elder care, particularly if you have a wage gap, if you are in a couple, it will be the lower paid worker who takes time out. If you are on your own, it might mean you lose your job and you have to start again. And that means over time, the wage gap gets bigger. On the other hand, there's a virtuous cycle. If there's job protected leave, we know that this has an impact, positive impact on women's pay. Affordable, reliable quality. There actually is the research to show that it has an impact on women's earnings and hence the wage gap. And with these overall supports, women can stay in the workforce and their families benefit, and it also is likely to reduce the wage gap. All right, next slide, please. Whoops. That was too, here we are. Okay, so the second policy tranche we want to talk about is employment and training, particularly wraparound supports, and I'll pass over to Julie now.
Hi there. As Ariane said, thank you for asking us to join you today to talk about this. I have worked on our Status of Women in the States project, and I'm now working on an initiative looking at the role of support services in helping people to complete job training. And so for my portion, I'm going to focus on one specific policy contribution that can tackle the wage gap, which is wraparound supports in training and in colleges. So IWPR began an initiative about 8 years ago to look at the challenges of students who are parents in college and the supports that help them get through. So we know that having a college degree or a credential significantly increases earnings for both women and men, but we also know that many people who try to get these credentials don't complete them. So having kids is a significant barrier. Next slide, please. It's a barrier a lot of women students face. More than 1 in 3 women students at community colleges have children, and the majority of these women are single mothers. So the percentage of women students with children varies by race and ethnicity, and African American women students are the most likely to have children, with more than half of them being student parents. Next slide. So not surprisingly, given the challenges they face with balancing the demands of caregiving with their schooling, student parents have a lower completion rate than students who are not parents. Among all beginning first-time students enrolled in a 2-year degree or certificate program, only 26% complete their program within 6 years. While having children is certainly one of the obstacles, it's also the case that about 7 in 10 student parents have low incomes and 2/3 work while in college. These factors and others combine to make it hard for many student parents to graduate. And even those who do graduate face the added challenge of having higher debt upon graduation. All this makes it more difficult for student parents to achieve long-term economic security. Next slide. One project that IWPR is working on right now looks at the role of supportive services in helping women, especially those who are mothers, complete job training programs and degree or credential programs at community colleges. The services shown on this slide are among those that many practitioners and researchers feel are important to job training and education success: transportation subsidies, child care services, affordable housing, and others you see listed. There are not a lot of evaluation studies that show exactly what the impact of these supports are on retention and completion rates, or how they affect future earnings and employment, but there are a number of studies that show that these services are associated with better outcomes on all those measures. In general, low-income women who have access to these services during their training and education are more likely to complete their programs and to get jobs with better wages. But there are certainly challenges involved with providing these services. A lot of organizations that offer training or education don't have the resources to offer many supportive services, some of which are expensive to provide. Many programs develop partnerships with other organizations in their communities that maximize what they can offer. These partners can provide services they don't and can help meet the needs of their participants. Next slide, please. But what we're finding is that even with those partnerships, supportive services often are not widely available, and some services are more available than others. The Workforce Benchmarking Initiative of the Corporation for a Skilled Workforce surveyed 259 community-based organizations that provide job training and found that the most commonly offered service was transportation. Still, fewer than half of organizations surveyed were able to offer this service to a majority of their participants. Only 6% of organizations surveyed were able to offer child care assistance to at least half of their participants. IWPR has been conducting interviews with experts in the field and surveys with administrators of job training programs, and we've been finding out that there is a significant need for more services. Without access to supportive services, many participants are unable to make it through their programs and ultimately move into better paying jobs. Still, there's some debate in the field about how much of a priority offering these services should be, given that there's limited funding and the fact that once women are in jobs, those services will likely not be available, which leads us to our second polling question.
Okay. Remember, if you have any questions, comments, or feedbacks, you can go ahead and type it in the question box, because in a few minutes we'll be taking those. And our second polling question. Okay. I'm going to launch that. Okay, we're getting a lot of activity here. Everybody seems to be agreeing with each other. Okay, we're in a high 60%. If you want to vote, go ahead and vote. I think everybody's been paying close attention to the webinar. That's what I think. They've been listening.
You think maybe it was a lead into this question?
Oh, no. Okay, so we're at just about 80%. I'm going to close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here's a surprise. There you go. I believe it's essential, and so does most of our audience.
Great. You know, we were kind of thinking, okay, should we keep this in? What if they all think it's not it's not necessary? What do we do then? So we have been practicing uselessly, fortunately, unnecessarily, our response to that.
Well, that's very interesting. I didn't think you would feel that way. I think it's pretty clear, and we certainly always have a great group of participants in our community, though I don't see too many questions coming in. Let me hide this poll. Thanks, everybody, for participating. Whoops, we did that. And then I wanted to show everybody, give you a moment to look at this information, contact information, in case you wanted to jot any of it down. And then I have a few more slides before we go ahead and do any questions you have.
I'd also wanted to stress again what Julie was saying. We are at the moment in the middle of a research project. You know, we kind of know, or everybody thinks from kind of anecdotally that support services are important, you know, and that they're almost as important as the academics to help people through. They're really comprehensively is not that much known. And so we are doing a survey with training programs at the moment, and we're also going to do surveys with survey with participants. So it's because we feel it needs to be more mainstream, and WEOIA is, you know, it's kind of telling programs to make more links with TANF and SNAP and so on, but it's haphazard, and it really leaves the programs to bend over backwards to, you know, do what they know they should be doing, but there aren't the systematic resources for a lot of them.
Well, that's why your work is so important, and we were so excited to have you share it with our community. To me, this is just something I know. I mean, I have no questions about it, but when you point out the fact that it isn't playing in Peoria, and I know, you know, it's very sad, but so many women don't know. There wasn't, you know, in my community, certainly on Twitter, Equal Pay Day last week was a very big deal, but so many women have no idea what it is. Thank you so much, Ariane. So let me just talk a minute about why this is so near and dear to my heart. And you can see here, you know, something that I feel is so important to surround ourselves and to share with other women the information we just learned, and to teach our daughters and granddaughters what it was like to be a woman in the past, what it's like to be a woman today. When we talk about the gender gap potentially, possibly closing in, I think it was 2058. Well, I know I won't be here. And I want to make sure that certainly my grandchildren know about this and know the effort, even from the days of the suffragettes. I think it's important. And so the feminization of poverty is something that I care very deeply about. I speak on it because it's so true that poverty has a woman's face. And why is that? It's because 56% of poor children live in households headed by women. More than 1 in 7 women live in poverty. And 45% of women living in poverty live in extreme poverty. And the older a woman gets, the more extreme her poverty. So why does poverty have a woman's face? It's because more than half of babies born to moms under 30 are born to unmarried moms. Women in all racial and ethnic groups experience higher poverty rates than white non-Hispanic men. And 2 of the strongest indicators of poverty are single motherhood and no college degree. And so the work you're doing at the Institute is just so important. So those of you who have been a part of our community for a while are familiar with the word feminomics that I created back in the late 90s and gave the definition of the gender of money. And we will close with a smile. It isn't quite that simple, but it is a factor. So before Q&A, I just want to share with you that the Financial Social Work Certification is made up of these 5 workbooks. It is an interactive, introspective behavioral model, and it is self-study and self-paced. Our students have 6 months to complete it and 2 weeks to complete the online final exam. It includes 20 CEUs from the National NASW. And the curriculum is being taught and has been taught since 2011 at the University of Kentucky. And financial social work is in the Oxford Press online encyclopedia of social work. And so now let's see if we have any questions for you to answer. Okay. Questions. Let's see. Oh, we do. Okay. Someone did share and make a very interesting point that none of the answers in that first poll fit what she believes, which is that her view is that when women start to enter a particular field, the perceived value of those jobs go down and wages decrease for both men and women. Do either of you have a comment on that?
Yes, I agree, although, so I agree that that's a factor, and what we're not quite sure about, it's often what happens is women go in when men leave the occupation because there are better opportunities elsewhere. So it might not just be women moving in, and also men who work in traditionally female jobs. Take something like cook, right? Cook is a very traditionally female job. It's very low paid. Women cooks earn less than male cooks, but it's predominantly male, and everybody earns poverty wages. So it's somehow this thing of the work that we associate with women's work traditionally, cooking, caring, health work, education, is lower paid, and it doesn't change that quickly. But you're certainly right. Often when fields that where male become open to women, it's associated with a drop in pay. Yeah, it's another one of these indignities. And maybe we should have added that to the list.
Okay, that was a good question. Okay, why do student mothers graduate with higher student debt?
I believe that what goes into that is that it simply takes them longer. They can't take as big of a course load, so they just have to stay continuously enrolled. And just anecdotally, I have some friends, and sometimes there's a semester where they can't take any classes, and yet you have to continue to give money to stay enrolled. So it probably mostly relates to the amount of time it takes them to complete.
But also having kids costs, right? It's not free, and you kind of have to, you have less flexibility. You have to attend classes, so you have to do something with your kids, and that, and it impacts how much you can earn at the same time. So at some level, I think it just reflects the costs of having kids. However, really, you may all have also your own friends or experiences with clients, because what we showed was the data out of a national data set, but it's not based on individual interviews with women.
Great, very interesting. I would tend to agree. I know that meeting the requirements is what takes a lot of time very often. So you seem to have controlled for a lot of factors in the wage gap. Do men and women have comparable wages in government, social service, or non-profit sectors?
We have, we know that the wage gap is lowest in the federal government. So it's lower there than in the private sector. In in state and local government, it depends whether you include security work, right? I can't remember which level is responsible for police and those type of jobs. So at state and local level, there are quite a few kind of non-traditional jobs for women, and often they pay more. But what's interesting is in the 80s, there was a big emphasis on tackling this. We basically going beyond just people doing exactly the same job to saying, okay, women and men often don't, and women need more education and experience and to get to the same pay, and also often the factors in women's jobs, such as, you know, working with clients who might be really upset or might just be screaming at you, was not considered, and picking up the garbage, which is dirty and loud, is considered as a factor you should be paid more for. So that comparable worth in the 80s led to a number of state governments, half of all states, having initiatives to review their pay scales to make sure that, you know, jobs or pay accounted properly for experience, responsibility, environment in a way that wasn't biased against women's jobs. And in the 80s, there was a jump in the pay gap to some extent because of that. Some states still do that. For example, West Virginia still has an initiative like this. New Mexico is still working on this. California doesn't have an official obligation to remedy any differences, but every 2 years there has to be a report to the California State Assembly on wage differences. So there is an active way of trying to address this, and some of them are more successful than others. In the not-for-profit sector, all I know is that overall, I don't know about the wage gap within it, although I know that large non-profits are much more likely to be run by men and smaller ones by women, and that overall not-for-profit sector has lower earnings than the private sector, but within it I'm not as sure. What was the last thing I'm going to say? I think, you know, we are kind of getting back to a point where this is back on the agenda, and some of the states that recently have passed equal pay laws are trying to edge into the kind of significantly equal or substantially equal part so that you can compare more. And also transparency helps enormously. That's another factor, you know, so that you can question the reasons behind pay, but also the criteria for what it takes to head here, you know, whether promotions are clearly advertised and so on. So yes, the public sector is doing better than the private sector, but elsewhere in the world, all other high-income countries actually have laws to say that you need to take a comparable worth perspective. But in the US, we are also a bit behind on that one.
Okay, Freakonomics has a great podcast on the wage gap. Would you agree that women are more in demand about flexible work arrangements to support families and therefore will be paid at a discount for the premium of flexible employment? Well, I would. Would you?
Actually, no.
Well, isn't that interesting?
No, yeah, because the research shows men are more likely to have flexibility at work than women. It's not a huge difference, but, you know, you would think then that it also shows that men are more likely to be given flexibility. It's very much flexibility for what, you know, and a woman asking for flexibility for childcare is least likely to be granted that flexibility. I do know that podcast, and I think one of the issues, or at least I think it's with Claudia Golden, who's a great researcher at Harvard, and what she was saying is she didn't say women get paid less because they want flexibility, but she said they kind of congregate towards the sectors where more flexibility is possible. And I think that probably is a factor. I think this is interesting. Mm-hmm. And I also think that what you see is that in most sectors, more flexibility would be possible if you put your mind to it. And so, for example, in construction or transport jobs, it's the kind of, okay, women aren't there, so, you know, the jobs are organized in a way, and people saying, well, they're organized in this way because they have to be organized in this way, and that's why women don't want them. I think it's because they don't let women in, and therefore they don't investigate ways of making jobs more flexible. And most jobs can have greater flexibility. So I do think it does play a role, but not as big a role as the people who say, okay, the wage gap is just due to women's choices would like us to think.
Well, I see that more as women choose part-time jobs because they need to be available to their children. So that's how I was looking at it. I certainly appreciate your optimism, Ariane. So I don't know if this is a student of ours or someone considering the certification, but she wants to know if she would be marketing herself as a certified financial social worker after graduating the certification, and that would be yes. A BSW or MSW becomes a certified financial social worker, and all others become a certified financial social work educator coach. So we have more comments and feedback. What are our legal rights when we are knowingly paid less than our male counterparts? Can we take legal action? Do you have any idea on that?
Yes, you can. I mean, in the U.S., you have to make a claim to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They have to be the first point of call, but whatever they tell you, you can then either have a private claim or go to do it with a lawyer. But certainly, if you know you're being underpaid, do something about it. Often, you may, which few people have now, but go to your union first, if that is possible, or to an association, discuss it with friends, see whether you can go directly to an HR person if they seem friendly, but just to see whether you can sort it out without having to take legal recourse. But certainly being paid less than a man for the same work, yes, that is certainly covered. And also, I should say, if you ask your supervisor or an HR person about this and afterwards they retaliate against you, that is just as illegal as paying you less.
But probably difficult to prove. Someone wants you to know that West Virginia did attempt a bipartisan equal pay bill this year, but could not get traction in this political environment. Mm-hmm. We do have more questions, but it is just 3 o'clock, and I want to make sure to thank our wonderful speakers for this wonderful program. I want to thank all of you who joined us today, and I hope that you will all become part of our community and that the Institute for Women's Policy Research will continue to do the wonderful work they're doing and to improve the lives of women, children, men, and families. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you back here next month. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.